Following the escape of the monstrous pirate, Juzo Ramses, Straw Hat members Blackfoot Sanji and Roronoa Zorro have temporarily separated from their crew and allied themselves with Tashigi and Sanji's old flame Marion, captain of the Black Clover Pirates, in order to stop the threat while confronting the long-neglected demons from their past. Part 2. Quills. "There's our Uncharted Island," Sanji commented as Zorro joined him upon the bow. The two straw hats stared out at the approaching spike of hostile rock and dry brush, which looked as inviting as a wasp's nest. "Why is it uncharted?" the swordsman asked without much curiosity. "I got to talking with one of the Clover pirates last night." Sanji flicked cigarette ash over the rail. "Apparently the island spins in a slow circle because of underwater currents. You can't really chart it properly because the island is constantly in motion." Sounds like something you would find on the Grand Line." Zorro shrugged. "So, the Navy tried using it for a while?" "They did. So did the Black Clovers," the cook confirmed. "Can't really blame them for abandoning it. Must be a pain trying to pinpoint it. Fortunately, Marion figured out the coordinates of where it would be. She actually has a log post that records it." "Right. Marion the pirate, who you care about but apparently don't trust." Zorro's eyes narrowed. "Yep," Sanji confirmed without hesitation. "This was a bad idea," Zorro muttered. "Too late now," the cook responded simply. The Clover pirates made sure information was leaked to the chess piece pirates that the remaining ships would meet here before abandoning the Grand Line. "They'll expect a trap," Zorro glowered. "Very likely. But they won't be expecting you and me, or Smoker and his men for that matter, since the island is uninhabited and the perfect spot for a final confrontation." Zorro squinted and put his hand over his eyes as he stared at the lagoon. The skeletal remains of what looked to be an abandoned ship were grounded in the bay upon the sand. "If it's uninhabited, why is there a wreck?" he asked. Sanji glanced towards the beach as the sound of rapid footfalls across the deck made both men turn around, and suddenly Marion was there in her long coat, cutlass back upon her belt, captain's sash around her waist, and spyglass in her hand. There was no trace of the hurt in her eyes Sanji had seen there the previous night. "Is that one of your ships?" Sanji asked her. "I don't see anyone on board." "That looks like the Rising Storm, one of the ships we're supposed to rendezvous with, but it's not flying any colors. This doesn't make sense. What would cause them to crash? The lagoon is as smooth as silk." "Better question. If it's not wrecked, why would your ship run itself onto the sand in the exact spot we planned to launch a surprise attack?" Zorro asked. "They wouldn't," Marion replied with certainty. "How sure are you that it's actually your ship?" Sanji grimaced as his eyes scanned the mysterious vessel from every angle. Instead of answering, Marion raised her arm to signal the crow's nest, and the pirate rang the bell obediently. They waited in silence for a few moments, for a response of some kind from the first ship, but none came. "What's going on?" Tashigi asked as she joined them, her glasses reflecting the morning fire as she took in the view of the ghost ship. She borrowed the spyglass from Marion, who pointed to the sand after a moment. "There are no tracks anywhere on the beach, and no sign of a camp." "So the crew haven't disembarked," Sanji began. "Because they never got the chance. They were attacked." Marion snarled as she turned and began shouting at her crew. "Hard to port! Battle stations!" Zorro drew his swords, and Sanji placed one of his feet up on the railing in anticipation of an attack. "That's the Rising Storm, I'm sure of it," Marion snapped with sudden intense certainty and alarm. "I have to check on my crew." "Not on your own." Sanji snapped a half-second before the woman vanished like smoke in the breeze. "Damn it!" Sanji roared in frustration. He turned to Tashigi. "Any word from Smoker?" "Less than a mile away, with the wind on their backs." She waved her arm and closed her fist, and the dozen Marines stationed on the ship formed ranks behind them on the foredeck. "I'll prepare the men to row ashore on the far side of the bay." "Best hold off on that," Zorro hissed through clenched teeth. "I'm getting that feeling too," Sanji admitted. "We should raise the sails and wait for Marion." "I'm not the captain," Tashigi responded. "That's not my call." "Then I'll do it," Sanji snapped. Suddenly, Marion was back, her arms encircling Sanji's chest. "Get down! It's going to blow!" she cried out before Sanji felt a brief blur of motion as they teleported. followed immediately by a blow to his chest as he and Marion landed heavily upon the beach, and the air was knocked from his lungs. With an ear-splitting roar that shook their bones, the ghost ship exploded. Zorro didn't pause to think. Grabbing Tashigi around her waist, he hurled himself over the side of the deck as the blast wave hit the side of the cutthroat bounty, and wooden shrapnel rained down upon them like 1,000 piercing needles. The sea struck him on the flat of his back, and he grunted as he lost 2 of his swords on impact, and the freezing water swallowed them. Instead of releasing his grip on the marine officer, he kicked hard in the direction of the shore in case the bounty made to capsize. Tashigi squirmed in his grip in a sheer panic for a few moments before he realized what she was trying to tell him. He noticed the glint of light reflecting off her glasses as they descended towards the sea floor. He immediately adjusted his trajectory and shot downwards after them, scooping them up in his hand before redirecting them both back towards the beach. He lost sight of his swords. He'd have to come back for them. His head broke the surface, and he dragged Tashigi up alongside him. The young woman gasped and began hacking up seawater. "Can you swim?" he coughed. "Yes, but I can't see," she gasped in a blind panic. "Here." Zorro shoved her glasses into her flailing hands. "Swim to shore. I'll be right back." Before Tashigi could reply, Zorro had taken a massive breath and disappeared again into the depths of the bay. Sanji was back up on his feet in an instant. From the far side of the lagoon, he watched as the cutthroat bounty was violently knocked sideways by the force of the blast, and fiery debris rained down upon the deck. They had been fortunate that Marion had decided to change course when they did, because had they sailed much closer, the explosion would have likely engulfed the ship entirely. "Zorro!" Sanji called out as he watched the swordsman's head break above the water with Tashigi, a safe distance from the wreck. Almost immediately, he watched Zorro dive back down into the water, and Sanji sprinted out into the shallows to help their bespectacled comrade. In the distance, he could see some of the other Black Clover pirates and marines leaping over the side and into the bay to escape the onslaught of falling wreckage. Tashigi clawed her way forward through the icy salt water and regained her feet right as Sanji reached her and took her arm. "This way. I've got you." "What happened?" she sputtered as she frantically wiped at her glasses. "It was a trap," he glowered. Turning back towards the beach, he spotted 2 more pirates who Marion had teleported to safety as soon as she had dropped him off. Marion reappeared in a flash with the 3rd man before vanishing again with the speed of a lightning strike. As the men shakily made to stand upright, Sanji noticed a blur of motion behind them. "Look out!" he screamed a fraction of a second too late. Blood splattered the sand as 2 swords cut through the first 2 men as though they were ripe fruit, and they collapsed upon the beach like sacks of cornmeal. The 3rd man was clearly disoriented, but managed to get his pistol up before a sword skewered him beneath his breastbone. The pistol fired as his body spasmed, but the woman wielding the blades idly tilted her head to one side and dodged the shot, strands of her plum-colored hair fluttering wildly in the bullet's wake. She wrenched her sword free of the man and whipped it down quickly to angle at her side, sending a fresh spray of blood into the breeze. Sanji grit his teeth in fury as his whole body tensed, and he found himself unable to react to the woman's onslaught. The female attacker turned to smirk at him with her serpent's eyes and took 2 steps forward, raising the tip of one of her blades to aim between his eyes. She had just stopped 3 heartbeats in as many seconds and hadn't even flinched. No. She was worse than a serpent, Sanji thought. She was the dark maw from which all serpents emerged. "Love the suit. I'd hate to ruin it," she taunted. Sanji couldn't bring himself to raise his leg to counter her attack, not out of fear, but of reluctant fortitude. He made to sidestep her thrust instead, but the wet sand threw off his balance as the tip of the blade shot past his cheek. Just as she made to pivot and slash him across the throat, there was a blur of motion and a great clash of metal on metal as both of her blades connected with a third. Tashigi was between them, her own sword drawn and angled perfectly to block her attack. "Lady Rook!" the young woman called out with fire on her tongue. "You have the blood of dozens of Marines on your hands. We have the island surrounded. You will surrender yourself now!" The woman called Lady Rook smirked. "This little butterfly thinks she's a wasp." The swords shrieked as they disconnected, and the older woman rained down blow after blow on Tashigi's curved blade with her own twin sabers. Tashigi lost ground by half a step, but held her own, blocking every strike that was dealt her. "Damn you!" Sanji roared towards the vile woman, furious at the sight of Tashigi in peril. Flipping himself forwards, he planted his hands in the sand and spun his legs above him in a helicopter blade formation, and with master accuracy he struck the hilt of one of Lady Rook's swords with his heel and sent it flying. Before it fell far enough to hit the earth, a black, shadowy figure suddenly sprang forward as if birthed from thin air and swung a sword of its own, striking the falling blade at an upward angle and sending it twirling back into the air, where Lady Rook nimbly caught it again by its grip. Sanji's breath caught in his throat. What the? The woman's shadow slithered along the sand like a trained anaconda and stood upright just behind her as though it was a separate person wielding its own twin swords in a horrific mimicry of its master. "She's a devil fruit eater," Tashigi hissed to Sanji as she braced herself for another attack. "Not quite," Lady Rook quipped. "Let's just say Gecko Moria owed me a favor." She launched herself forward and her shadow followed. 4 blades, 2 silver and 2 shadowy black, screamed through the air. Tashigi deflected 2 of the blows expertly, but the 3rd sliced her across the shoulder, and the 4th knocked the legs out from under her. Sanji launched a furious kick at the shadow, but he flew right through it without making physical contact and landed hard on the sand. Lady Rook made to stab downwards at Tashigi, but a solid elbow connected with her sternum and her cavalier hat flew off. Marion had appeared out of thin air directly between the two and managed to plant a blow into the woman's chest as she drew her own sword. The villainess took 2 steps backward to steady herself and raised both of her swords upwards, points forward as though imitating a scorpion. Marion and Tashigi stood side by side, swords drawn and staring back at her. "You killed my men. I'm going to cut out your heart and nail it to my masthead." Marion's words seemed to scorch themselves into the sea breeze around them. "You'll have to find it first." The woman spoke with ice to counter Marion's scathing voice. The shadow launched itself around Lady Rook, and its swords crashed against the waiting blades. Sanji watched as Tashigi and Marion masterfully blocked the blows against the villain's self-conscious mirror image, as the woman with plum-colored hair made to circle around them. Sanji grit his teeth so hard his jaw popped. He had an opening. From his position, he could launch a kick directly into the woman's abdomen before she could counter him with her swords, and knock her a good distance away from his friends. But his body refused to comply. He paused as he heard a young child's voice echo through his head, as if calling from the deepest of forgotten caverns.
"I'll never hurt anyone like that, especially you."
His throat tightened as he remembered her face, eyes swollen, nose bleeding, but a warm smile spreading across her face regardless.
"I know you won't, Sanji,"
she replied as she hugged him, and his tears wet her cheeks.
"You'll be the greatest type of man, one who protects women."
Staring at the fight with glossy eyes and a conflicted soul, the masterful fighter was at odds with himself as he pondered the seemingly ancient vow he had made to the most important person in his life. It transcended far beyond the importance of anything else. His conflicts with Marion, his work in Baratier's kitchen, his pact with Luffy as part of his crew. But now, Lady Rook was advancing on his friends, and if he didn't do something, his inaction would get them killed. "God damn it!" he screamed as he saw red and fired himself into the air. Instead of delivering the prearranged kick, he swiped his foot roughly through the loose sand and launched a blinding cloud of dust into the woman's eyes. Before she could react, he swiped his other foot across the sand in the opposite direction, and then continued the pattern, rapidly pelting her with wave after wave of millions of tiny particles and obstructing her view, driving her away from the pirate captain and the marine officer. "Are you still here?" he heard her cough, and with a toss of her cape, the air between them cleared, and she caught Sanji's outstretched leg with the flat of her blade. "We're playing with fire while you're struggling to master the flint," she chided, her piercing eyes laughing at him. "Are you a fool or a coward? The Grand Line has no need of either." "Neither. I'm a cook," he snapped and kicked himself into the air. He spun his body clockwise, catching her blade tip above his toe, and he brought down his other foot with the force of a lightning strike and broke her sword in half. Immediately, one of the swords the shadow wielded evaporated into nothingness, and, caught off guard, it immediately began to fall back in distress as Marion and Tashigi doubled their attack. Sanji landed nimbly on the sand and stared back at the woman's astonished face as he continued, "And I don't leave blood in my wake." She indignantly tossed the broken weapon aside and raised her remaining blade with both hands and smirked at him. "You will." "Sanji!" he heard Marion scream from behind him. His world suddenly exploded in pain as he felt a blade bite deep into the meat of his left shoulder. His legs collapsed underneath him as he felt the sword twist itself. He felt an icy sensation run over his skin as the woman's shadow passed over him to reposition itself next to her, his own blood staining the dark replica of her own blade. "A white knight's blood is the best kind to spill." Lady Rook's voice filled his wound like poison.
It's like striking oil.
Sanji collapsed forward, and his face hit the sand, but he could still hear her voice hovering over him.
Every drop had value. Best make it last and let it drain from you slowly.
He felt a rush of motion above him, and heard Lady Rook's grunt as she was knocked backwards across the beach, and her shadow followed comically in her wake like a puppet on a string. He didn't need to raise his head to figure out what happened, because there came the familiar sound of teeth clenching down on metal, and he felt a rush of sudden relief. Zorro had joined the fight. After Zorro had located his fallen swords at the soggy base of the bay, he kicked himself back up towards sunlight and breathed in deep as he tried to collect his bearings. Across the beach, rifles were being fired from what felt like every direction as a dozen chess-piece pirates emerged from their hiding places and took aim at the Clovers and Marines leaping from the cutthroat bounty. Zorro deflected shot after shot with the flats of his blades as he launched himself up out of the water and tore across the sand, cutting down enemy combatants left and right and giving what men were still in the water a chance to reach the shore safely. The chess-piece pirates wore varying layers of black and white checkerboard patterns, and their uniformity made it easy for Zorro to identify his enemy and dispatch them. As he cleared a path up the beach, several of Tashigi's Marines were able to find cover behind the scattered debris of the first ship and return fire. Zorro paused to tie his green bandana tightly around his scalp and placed the handle of his third sword between his teeth. He tasted salt water in his mouth as he bit down hard on the katana's grip, and the ocean that had soaked itself into the bindings ran free, as if from a sponge. "Ten-ton Talon!" he cried out through gritted teeth and struck down 3 incoming enemies with the speed and deadly force of an eagle's claw impaling a salmon. Behind him, he heard the Black Clover pirates and Marines cheer as they realized Zorro was evening the playing field and their attackers began to fall. He quickly scanned the beach and spotted Sanji, Tashigi, and Marion on the far side of the bay battling against 2 figures wielding blades. He parried a blade strike from another daring chess-piece pirate and sliced his attacker's sword into 4 pieces before cutting the man down and putting him into the sand, before the ringing vibration of the severed metal was finished echoing in his ears. Zorro kicked himself upwards off the shoulder of another bewildered enemy and made his way towards his lanky crewmate. From behind him, he heard the cannons aboard the cutthroat bounty began to sing their booming lyrics, as what men remained on board targeted their enemies on the beach. The swordsman had nearly closed the distance when a change in the air tickled at his senses, and he pivoted just in time to avoid a heavy metal chain taking off his head. A pirate twice his size moved to intercept him and block his path. The great brute sported a chest pawn with a skeletal face tattooed upon his bare chest, and strapped upon his back was the massive steering wheel of a pirate ship, with dozens of chains wrapped around it like a ball of twine. The large man cackled through rows of broken, jagged teeth, and took another swing at Zorro, his collection of chains clinking loudly against each other like a rusty wind chime. The swordsman easily parried the blow with one of his katanas, and the chain snapped as he sliced through it gracefully. Undeterred, the man reached behind him and spun the great wheel upon his back, feeding out more chain as if it were string on a fishing pole. But suddenly, a great black mass of ooze splattered him directly between his eyes, and he bellowed in furious confusion over being temporarily blinded. Zorro looked over his shoulder. Standing just behind him was a Black Clover pirate, with long, slimy black hair, and his hand extended outward, a thick slime running from between his fingers. "Inking fruit," the man stated breathlessly. "I've got him. Go help the captain." Without pausing to think twice, Zorro tore across the sand, bullets whizzing past him from all sides. He batted them away like flies with his blades. He watched as the cook was skewered from behind by a shadowy form, and he snarled in irritation and rage. You could tell his friend's wound wasn't fatal, but it would slow him down, and they couldn't afford to lose ground. Zorro kicked himself off a fallen tree and soared through the air, spinning his body like a shuriken star and slamming himself into the attacking woman, knocking her backward. Zorro hit the sand in a crouching position and launched himself forward again, and to his amazement, the woman parried all 3 of his blades with a single strike of a rapier. His breath caught in his throat, and he had a horrific flashback of the day when Dracul Mihawk had accomplished the same feat using only the dagger he wore around his neck.
Roronoa Zorro.
The woman's eyes lit up as she leaned her weight into stance and put more pressure on his blades.
I've been hoping to encounter you,
she chided. Zorro shifted his weight and broke his locked blades free, pivoting sideways and repositioning himself, reevaluating his plan of attack. The woman idly tossed her hat aside, and the shadow mimicked her actions. No! She paused, and the shadow fell silently upon the ground again to follow her passively as any shadow would.
This isn't cutting through weeds. It's slaying a dragon. The glory will be mine alone.
She straightened her back and pointed her single rapier forward with one arm, the point level with his eye.
3-sword style. Keeps you from getting too chatty, I see. Personally, I find 2 blades cumbersome enough, but that's mostly for intimidation anyway. 1 is all I'll need to put you down.
Zorro's blades ricocheted through the air like lightning strikes, but she fluidly, almost effortlessly, countered each blow without once losing her balance.
We're practically siblings, you and I.
She grinned, unfazed by his piercing glare. With her free hand, she lifted her shirt to expose a long, blood-red scar which ran diagonally across her smooth stomach.
Mihawk,
she declared as she let her shirt drop again.
He spared my life. Any deeper, and my guts would have painted the ground at my feet. I heard you were baptized by Yoru as well.
Zorro normally wouldn't indulge in petty chides meant to delay the duel, but every moment she kept speaking was another moment he read her body language and analyzed her patterns to try to determine her next move. He wasn't sure if he believed her story about Mihawk, but true or not, he had her beat. He tore off his shirt and let it fall in tatters upon the sand, exposing his broad chest and massive scar which ran from left shoulder to right hip that the warlord had graced him with upon the East Blue on the day he had first met Sanji.
It seems he sees potential in both of us,
she acknowledged.
Let's see which child of Mihawk was correctly assigned his faith.
Her movements were as quick and explosive as a bullet from a rifle. Zorro barely had time to counter her blow before her blade tip embedded itself between his ribs. He blocked her attack and attempted again to rain blows upon her, but to no avail. He moved like a charging bull, while she glided around him like a coiled serpent. He couldn't defeat her with brute strength. He had to find a way to outmaneuver her, break her focus, and bury his katana in her neck. Marion tore her scarf free and attempted to staunch Sanji's wound while Tashigi rolled him onto his side so he could better catch his breath. They were all dead. There were quills embedded in the deck everywhere. Marion spoke rapidly. It was all a diversion. They rigged the gunpowder to blow. Where's Smoker? Sanji gasped for breath.
I'm not sure,
Tashigi answered nervously.
They were waiting for us. My men are being overrun.
How did they know? Sanji asked. I have an idea. Marion glared as she watched Zorro and Rook dance across the sand, trading sharp metallic blows. There came a second explosion from the bay, and they all turned to see Marion's flagship, the Cutthroat Bounty, erupt into flames as massive quills the size of broadswords tore through its wooden shell.
No!
Marion gasped as she saw her remaining men topple off the ship into the shallows like rag dolls, most of them impaled by the massive black spikes. You can't help them. Don't teleport. Sanji grunted and grabbed her arm. Marion! He shouted and made her look at him. Get yourself and Tashigi to safety. Find somewhere on the island to hide. I'm not leaving my men, Marion snapped. We've lost. Sanji groaned as he clutched his wounded shoulder, and Tashigi helped him back to his feet. There's no sense in your dying today. Not when you can vanish and live to fight another day.
There he is.
Tashigi interrupted as she pointed across the bay. The massive figure of Juzo Ramses was striding up the beach, his quills sticking out from his upper back at every angle, and his overcoat in shreds from where hundreds of razor-tipped harpoons had been fired through it. His parson's hat shaded his eyes but did nothing to hide the man's deranged, manic grin as he walked across the bodies of pirates and marines alike. "Go," Sanji grunted. "I'll slow him down. You two get out of here." He quickly scanned the beach both directions. The cutthroat bounty and the rising storm were both on fire. The gunshots had stopped, and he couldn't make out any allies who were still standing amongst the remaining chess-piece pirates scattered along the beach. Marion and Tashigi held their ground with Sanji propped between them, 3 lowly saplings in the path of the wildfire. Ramses roared with laughter as he launched a quill from his forearm and skewered a marine upon the sand. The chess-piece pirates around him cheered. Sanji thought of Nami and Robin, and how much he loved them both, and how he wished he could have done more for them before Marion had whisked him away. He had wanted to see Nami's completed world map, and hear all about Robin's discoveries relating to the poneglyphs. Most of all, he had wanted to show them both the wondrous perfection of the all-blue. "I'm proud to die beside you two," Sanji told the woman as he raised his leg at the knee and prepared to launch himself forward. Ramses was getting closer, and any moment now he would finally spot them. Suddenly, Sanji noticed a blur of something, like a fog, glide its way up the beach and envelop Ramses from behind.
Look!
Tashigi cried out. There was a faint snap of metal as Smoker materialized out of the air next to the towering scarecrow and snapped a sea stone cuff to the villain's wrist. Ramses roared in fury and swung around, awkwardly firing quills from his back at the brutish marine, but they passed right through him like arrows fired into the mist. Smoker pulled his jite from behind his back and made to stab it into Ramses' torso, but the blunted sea stone tip couldn't penetrate his skin. He spun and delivered a solid punch right into the towering beast's crooked jaw. "He's got him!" Marion cried out. "We have to help him!" From behind him, they heard a grunt from Zorro as Lady Rook's blade tip found his upper thigh. "I'll help Zorro!" Tashigi called out as she ran to him. "You two help Smoker!" Tashigi sprinted forward and deflected a blow meant for Zorro's neck as the man panted in exhaustion, sweat pouring down his face and chest. "No room for 3 in this chess game," Lady Rook hissed, and her shadow reappeared to intercept the young woman. "I hate chess!" Tashigi grimaced and pivoted her blade to catch the sun, temporarily blinding Lady Rook and giving her the opportunity to slice the woman behind her knee. Lady Rook snarled as both she and her shadow swung at Tashigi with their blades, but Zorro blocked the puppeteer's sword with one katana and the puppet's with another. With the third blade between his teeth, he managed to strike and slice a cut across the woman's cheek. Lady Rook retreated 3 steps and glared at the two of them, the pirate and the marine. "Okay then," she snarled as blood trickled down her cheek. "A noble victory is the first casualty. Which of you will be the second?" She caught the edge of a fallen Clover pirate's blade with her heel and expertly tossed it upwards and caught it with her free hand. Instantly, her shadow birthed a second sword of its own. Zorro and Tashigi launched themselves forward towards her. Marion teleported herself across the beach, cutting down the remaining chess-piece pirates with her blade, and clearing a path for Sanji as he sprinted towards Smoker and Ramses. The marine was trying to ensnare the monstrous pirate's other hand in the cuff and subdue him. None of the other pirates were willing to get close, as Ramses was still firing projectile quills in every direction, trying to impale his troublesome attacker. Still clutching at his wounded shoulder, Sanji ran forward and kicked himself up into the air, aiming a kick at Ramses' head. Then, something struck him between the shoulder blades and he was sent flying sideways to crash into the shallows. He gasped and coughed up seawater as he scrambled back to his feet. A hooded figure landed in the sand in front of him, and Sanji recognized the stance it took as it slowly raised one leg upwards at the knee, revealing a cloven hoof instead of a foot. "You must be Bishop," Sanji acknowledged as he gave a half-hearted smirk and raised a new cigarette to his mouth, despite being drenched in seawater. "And you're the Blackfoot," the bishop replied in a monotone voice. "I was there at Ennie's lobby. I saw what you did to Jabra." "I don't remember who that is." Sanji shrugged as his lighter sparked a flame and he lit his smoke, My mind was on saving my friend. Were you one of Rob Lucci's goons? The waves crashed in around his feet as Bishop stared him down from under the hood. He wished I was. Sanji ignored the salt water burning inside his wound as he took a careful step forward. You're the first person I've met on the Grand Line who has studied Blackfoot style. He pointed his chin in their direction. Who taught you? The bishop's cloven hoof gleamed against the sunlight. Someone we've both since surpassed, came the reply. Marion appeared beside Sanji and raised her sword, but Sanji took hold of her shoulder. I've got this. You help Smoker.
You don't know what he's capable of.
Marion glanced at him. Oh, I know better than anyone else. Sanji smirked. He kicked himself forward and brought up his left foot to connect with Bishop's chest, but his leg was parried by a dark, muscular shin, and both of them spun through the air as they each tried to deal another blow. Sanji landed on his hands and flipped himself back into the air. Bishop, perhaps reluctant to land upside down and let the cloak slip, took the extra movement to pivot in midair and land on the cloven hooves. Sanji caught the figure with a hard right kick to the side and sent the robed assailant catapulting across the sand to land in the weeds. Sanji spun on his heel to heat the leather and tapped his cigarette against his soul to ignite it. I've been looking for someone to kick clear across this island since I arrived. He spoke with fury and charged towards his fallen opponent. Fortunately for the sword wielder, I don't engage women, but for you, all bets are off. Sanji landed another blow directly underneath Bishop's chin and set the cloak on fire with his blazing shoe as the figure was thrown backwards again to land hard against the unforgiving parched earth. The lanky cook hit the sand again and stood up straight, his eyes as fiery as his foot as he marched forward, preparing to deal another blow. Bishop stood and tossed the burning cloak aside, revealing large violet eyes and a petite chin, smooth shoulders, and a pale, exposed midriff. The chest was small, but the bumps were visible enough underneath the leather top to confirm what was present underneath. Sanji froze in his tracks as the woman wiped blood from her lower lip and stood back up, her cloven feet planted firmly in the dirt. I wouldn't have it any other way, she smirked.